We're there. We're there. 5 o'clock. So as you know, a symbol of compromise with the BPW in the city, we have our meetings typically at 6, them at 4. So here we are at 5. We have a live audience and a virtual audience here. And we'll cover a variety of topics that again are sort of a shared interest to both the city and the BPW and the residents and taxpayers at large, or ratepayers, I should say, at large, and taxpayers. So we'll call to order, and then I'll turn it over to, this is something again BPW does, maybe we should do, but a roll call. Tom, you're used to doing a roll call, so it says roll call on here, so.
Well, I just announce who's here. So.
I think we're all here. I think the board, essentially the BPW board is here. The council, both of our staffs in the form of Austin's our general manager of BPW, Anne Marie and Ellen Lorraine from the city. We both have a legal representation, Mike and Alex standing in for Glenn tonight. And the first topic we'll take on, and again, we're not going to get too deep into the weeds tonight on this, but the first topic is a discussion about the Army Reserve Center and facilities planning. And just, you know, the reason we don't want to get too deep in these, we actually haven't gotten the orders from the Army yet. They are coming, so we will get the facility, but we don't know what, you know, sort of conditions go along with that. One thing that we will take on tonight, GMB has done a sort of a spatial sort of planning study, preliminary to understand what our footprint is now in terms of what we have in inventory and potentially may need. But you know, I would just like to say again, this was again a cooperation. I know Tom and Austin attended a lot of those meetings, Anne Marie, and I think we mentioned, you know, if those who saw in the article, there was a lot of people like Mert Foos who helped us, you know, get in the building. Who's and I just like to especially thank Councilperson Saliba as well, who just was able to bring his knowledge of from his own experiences to help guide the city, point that out as an opportunity, a pathway for the city to take this opportunity on. And you know, through everyone's hard work and efforts, it seems paid off. I know there's going to be some investment in terms of time and resources on the part of the city, but I do think I'll stand by this. I think it's a win for the city, you know, for the future. And so I'll leave it at that. And I don't know if anyone else has comments from either side.
To piggyback on that is that I think we also have to thank the congressional contingent.
Absolutely.
I mean, Cooper Collins,
Harper Cruz
and Lisa Blunt Rochester were. If it wasn't for them, this would never have happened.
Absolutely.
So we really do. Are represented by a great group in Washington.
Absolutely, yeah. All three paid personal visits here to the city, and they showed a real personal investment of interest and time in this. So, yeah, good, well said.
Since we're going to acknowledge public officials, and I think Tom is exactly right. I'd be remiss if we didn't mention our local officials who were very, very helpful as well. And that was, we had a letter that was sent to the congressional delegation from Pete Schwarzkopf, Speaker Pete Schwarzkopf, Councilman Mark Schaefer, Representative Steve Smith, Senator Ernie Lopez, as well as Mayor Williams. And that certainly had quite an impact on them, knowing that our local officials were unified and Lewes being the preferred recipient of the property, because there was competition with other entities as well.
So again, just in terms of sharing information that we do have, you said GMB does want to give a top level on the spatial study.
So they're still in the process of completing the functional needs assessment, but they're getting close. I know I got an email from Morgan with some questions today. Austin and I got an email yesterday from Sherry with some questions. So I don't know, Morgan, do you want to kind of provide an update on where that is?
Sure. Okay, come on.
Good evening. My name is Morgan Helfrich from GMB. Sorry that Charlie is not here with us today. He's on vacation. So just to go over what we were charged to do was to look at, all the needs for both the city, the DPW, the police department, as well as all the surrounding areas off of Schley Avenue, and how much spatial needs, are needed, tracking forward, considering growth, for a new facility on the Army site. So what I provided, Anne Marie with today was, the initial site study that we did on Schley Avenue. I'm gonna skip that for now because you guys are already there. You kind of already know what it's about. So the initial site assessment for the Army site is that it does have good soils. It is outside of any flood hazard areas, so it does look good in that regard. We did find one underground storage tank on the site.
Any idea what's in that storage tank?
No, not yet, but we can get, if we do a little bit more digging, probably find that out. So this was super preliminary, so
Sure.
we'll try to dive into that. We did not find any tax ditches or tax ditch right of ways within a close proximity to the site. There's no state or federal wetlands shown on the site at all. And the groundwater recharge potential is fair for the site. So that was the initial site analysis. And then we moved over to basically sending out questionnaires to every single department and asking them what their needs would be. It's kind of like a Taj Mahal. If you could have anything you want moving forward, what would it be? You know, number of offices, storage space, vehicles, everything. So I'm just gonna go through the highlights of that real quick from each department. And I just want to preface this, that usually it's called a functional area comparison. Usually the first stab at it is quite high from the square footage perspective because people are asking for, the highest level if they could get it. Then what we have.
Can we stop right there, actually? So when you go that route, then how do you then pull them back to reality?
Well,
Because the
usually-
Taj Mahal is not.
Right,
gonna-
exactly. But
So
there's
so I
something-
didn't tell them it was a wish list. I asked them to be realistic in their
Yeah.
expectations.
Well, usually some things we can do are look at things that could be shared facilities that won't have to be doubled. So because we did this individually by each department, there could be some spaces that are shared. So we haven't gone through that analysis yet to see what items could be not doubled under each department, if that makes sense. The other would be certain areas that may not need to be housed in this new facility on this site. And that all of that will need to be done with the city and DPW and the police separately as a follow-up to this. And then finally, this may lead to like a conversation of how many floors the new facility would want to be and which departments would want to be in connection with each other if they are on the same floor, and security and those kinds of things. So we do like to pare it down, but it's a good way to at least let everyone have their voice to say what they want and they need, moving forward, and how we can consolidate all their needs into one. So we started out with the police department. As you know, we did a preliminary case study research. So this was pretty easy because it's kind of the same information that they gave us before. The current city hall houses the police department, which is about 5,000 square feet. So that's what they have now. And after receiving all of their questionnaires for their needs moving forward, they've asked for a total of 16,700 square feet roughly, which is about 3.4 times the space that they have now.
And that's internal square footage?
Mhm.
I'm sorry?
That's under roof square footage.
Well, some of it may not need, that's what I'm saying. So some of that may not need to be under roof. So some of that storage could potentially go outside. But again, those were in the packets as well. I'm not sure if you shared them. For the city, existing, the city hall now is approximately 7,750 square feet.
And excuse me, that's just for the city staff offices, is that correct?
correct,
It's not counting the BPW side, right?
correct. Yeah,
Okay, thank you.
yeah,
7,000 square feet,
7,750.
thank you.
And after receiving all of those questionnaires and preliminary building square footage that they would need going forward would be about 25,000 square feet. So that is roughly 3.2 times the space that you guys have now. For BPW, the existing space is about 5,400 square feet. And they have gone through, and their needs moving forward are about 14,400 square feet, which is roughly 2.7 times the existing space.
May I interrupt you, please?
Sure.
When going back to the city hall calculation, was that with the idea of consolidating the offices that are presently on Schley Avenue into City Hall, or is that still kept separate?
We do,
You know, in other words, counting towards that existing 7750.
That does include the maintenance department.
it does. Yeah, so it does include Parks and Marina and maintenance. So again, when we go through that, some of that could be, you know,
Well, Parks and Marina that we only answered on behalf of the administrative staff, not the marina staff, or the lifeguards. So the maintenance, I think, is where you would get some reduction. But the other thing is that you mentioned before that there are opportunities for shared spaces. So this kind of assumes that each office would have its own, you know, break room, filing space. It doesn't, am I right that it doesn't account for kind of shared, some of those shared spaces?
no, with other departments. It
Right.
does not, correct, that's
Right.
correct. So we're really early on in this process, so the next thing would be is to try to take each departments and kind of consolidate them and then reduce that overall number. So what you're gonna see, you know, overall, right now, we're looking at a total square footage of the building without reduction of about 56,000 square feet, which is very, very high. And we'd like to obviously reduce that quite a bit moving forward. That, the only thing that does not include right now is the exterior storage space of the things that we need to still analyze off of Slay Avenue. Lay down areas, things not inside the building. We need some extra information on vehicle sizes.
80,000 square feet of interior space before we're even talking about,
56.
56.
oh, I must have added another 25. Okay.
56, which is roughly 3.1 times the total building size that you have now.
And you mentioned that you acknowledge that that is way above what we're realistic. What are you thinking in terms of a revised number?
After doing a little bit of research for other town halls and the size of Lewes, I'd like to get that number down to 40,000, which is a big push down. But I think it's still possible. Again, this is really just putting numbers on a spreadsheet. You know, it could totally work out possibly that once you get a floor plan and move on to schematic design, it could really, you know, take shape. We are taking things into account like circulation, building circulation, the actual thicknesses of the walls, which are all just percentages at this point. But that would be the range that I'd like to look at moving forward.
Did you,
Austin, you want to talk a little bit about what was put in the numbers from BPW and what you're going to stay in place?
Yeah, so our conference room is really small, so obviously we put in for a conference room. We put in for dedicated IT space. Right now, we're utilizing an office with a window AC unit for adequate air supply. So we did add, we added a couple things in there. So our IT is very robust because we have not only our systems, we're also tying things in like our SCADA system. So we want to make sure that it's secured and per industry standard, like Josh is maintaining now. And then we literally have no office space left. So we added in there, like adding an additional person in the office. You know, I believe it looked out to 2042. So we looked at it as like incorporating one extra person for the next, you know, 2 or 3, every 10 years or every 5 years. But there are ways, because the way that the current office is configured, there are ways that you could use probably 50% of the space. But if it's rearranged in an adequate kind of manner, you could really trim down or trim the fat per se.
But just to add on, this is assuming that we're not moving our field staff to the new building because of efficiency reasons. The trucks and warehousing and everything is on Schley.
We submitted them separately. We submitted the field staff on Schley, separate from the administrative staff at the office.
So just
Right, but-
for
but
the
this-
city's perspective.
This does include that in the numbers.
Just the interior building space needs
Right.
for BPW.
Right.
So it
Oh,
doesn't,
so it does
so-
include like the people on Schley.
right, so
Yeah.
there's no, this isn't saying, and again, this draft just came in this afternoon and we've been in a budget meeting all day. But this doesn't, say all of this is located at a specific location. It's what are the office?
No,
needs,
that's
space
what,
needs.
that's what, for BPW, what's in that number is only what we think is gonna move to the. new
No.
building.
No,
No,
it's everything.
yeah, the only thing that's not included in that number, I'm sorry for that if I misspoke, was any of the outside storage areas for your needs.
So I filled two separate ones out. I filled for the water and electric, essentially as two
Oh.
departments. This is combining both of those two sheets. So I filled them out separately,
So I
but
did not
it
see
is
your
combined.
sheet, that's what.
Right, so,
Yeah.
so part of this is, what are we going to build at the Army Reserve Center? But also, how much space do we need to retain and how should that space be used at Schley Avenue?
And what needs to be rebuilt on Schley then.
Right,
Thank you.
So what we then did was looked at the zoning of the existing Army site. The zoning of the site now is R2 residential. Obviously, the city does not need to rezone the property because you can, do the town hall as in the same district as that. I did also, if we want to have that conversation, talk about the commercial zoning or the town center zoning for what those requirements would be.
what about
Um,
community facilities? Did you look at that?
Yeah,
Is
we
That
did.
gives better, I mean, a
That's what I'm
taller
saying. I don't
height.
want to get too deep
Okay.
into the
Yeah.
weeds, because now we're talking about
Right.
zoning change, what's gonna
Yeah.
go there in
Yeah.
the future.
Zone it, but obviously,
Yeah.
the last thing that I'll say is that the existing Army building that's on that site now has a footprint of 20,000. So if that can kind of get a thought process in your mind of how big that building is and whether or not the new building would have a similar size footprint moving forward. And if you think about 2 or possibly 3 stories, that's a separate conversation for a separate day.
Right.
Um,
And Morgan, when you say that it's the existing building is 20,000, that's the building alone, not the parking lot,
Correct. that's
correct?
building
Just the
footprint.
under roof.
There, and
Right.
that's, include the
Yeah.
second floor portion, so just the.
Just wanted to make sure.
footprint, yeah.
Right.
And then finally, we did take one look at, the possibility of DelDOT allowing this site to have 2 entrances along the front. And right now, they've said they've made exceptions in the past for specific projects. Obviously, this would have police, so they could make an exception, but typically they don't allow it. 2 entrances have to be within a linear distance of 250 feet apart from each other. And we have about 320 feet of linear space across the front of the property. So we would be faced with probably looking at 1 entrance with possibly an additional lane that has, a bar that would be just for dedicated for the police, correct? And that was a lot, so if anyone has any questions.
Okay, before we take some from the group, is there any from the table that have
No.
questions? Okay, yeah, again, it's fairly preliminary. The other thing, like Aaron's asked this in the past, where you take, community feedback and all that. We will, this whole process will continue to take community feedback. So if we talk about 2 entrances and these types of things, this is our city's property. So we need to involve the citizens in this process.
Could I ask a question?
Go ahead. Yeah.
What would happen to the existing City Hall BPW building
Again,
if everybody is leaving?
I just think that's so, I think
What are the possibilities?
the possibility, we could be landlords and lease those properties out to other people. We
Right.
could raise them and sell the properties. We could use them as annex property, as annexations of our own I mean, it's also gonna tie into what, you know, the BPW's plans are for the future in terms of, you know, which direction you go with the county or not. I mean, how much footprint will you need or not? Well, we're a little ahead of our skis, you know, on this discussion.
I'm not sure how that, I'm not sure that impacts this decision at all.
Well,
We'll have, I mean,
We'll see.
that's what I'm saying, we're a little ahead of, in terms of what will dispose of those properties and. You know, we have a preliminary in terms of what the conditions are of that property and. You know, all those things.
One of the things to just keep in everybody's mind is for us, we do the 5-year capital plan. So trying to understand, you know, as it stands currently, we're renting. And so if the idea is there's going to be a share in any sort of capital investment, to know that ahead of time so that we can plan, because as we do, you know, any sort of rate study in that 5-year plan, and again, you're shooting for the stars at this point for trying to nail it down, but.
And Richard, to your point, one thing I've discussed with my colleagues is I'd actually like to see us put together some type of advisory group from the community that has different expertise in terms of site, maybe some site planning, maybe some real estate expertise in terms of what we can do with those other properties. And again, a good way to involve our community, you know. I think it'd be a positive thing to do to, one, give us cover as politicians to have them, you know, take on some of that ownership.
Yeah.
But
And
again, we
bring
have
your
we have a community that's rich in their expertise, and I think we could leverage that in this endeavor. So that's something I've talked about, and we should
Yep.
talk about potentially at the next BPW joint meeting is what, you know, what from each side, you know, who might good stakeholders in that committee be, or what did you call it? Advisory council.
Advisory, yeah.
Yeah.
Advisory committee, yeah.
right.
To Austin's
Citizen
point,
advisory.
you know, I think one thing that the board in particular and also members of council need to think about is right now, the city owns the building and the board's a tenant. Is that the arrangement that you would want in the future, or would it be more, you know, co-ownership or something of that sort? Because if we, you know, deal with the issue of financing, those things will be important.
Thank you, Morgan. And we did get Emery sent us the report, so we'll be able to digest some of the square footage numbers
Yeah,
that
no,
you gave us, so.
I will
Yeah.
just say that the patterns, it's interesting to me that all the questionnaires were set out separately to the department. So without the police talking to the city and without BPW talking to anyone else, that every department was tracking for the future, considering 5, 10, 15, 20 years out, 3 times the amount of square footage that they need now. So that is an interesting, you know.
Have you done these types of exercises before?
We have.
And what do you- like, how does this experience with Lewes compare, like in those type of multipliers?
It does. So the most recent one I've just done is for Newcastle. They are doing a joint MSC in Newcastle building. And their process has been the exact same. Except for they chose, after doing this process, they chose to take out growth beyond 10 years based on the facility size that they were getting to. So that is part of the next conversation that I'll have with the departments on, you know, an appropriate size, you know, that the city wants to look at for a building based on cost, you know, funding. Obviously, they have a site where they're building from scratch and they weren't given anything, so they have to, you know, think about the cost of the land as well, but so that, you know, that conversation is really independent for each project. On private projects, usually everyone wants their employees or whoever's, you know, being able to give their feedback. And it could be anything from, you know, I want free daycare for every employee or so, you know, something crazy. Obviously, some of those things don't follow through to get into the final. So some of these things we can kind of go through and see if they're possibly to be consolidated.
And one last question, I'm gonna break my own rule about getting into the weeds, but you did mention soil quality and the like the recharge. Do you foresee that we would need some kind of stormwater retention system there that would take square footage away?
We're gonna need that regardless. The good news is if you look at the site, you know, the good news is that most of that site is already impervious. So because you already have so much impervious area, you don't have to do anything for those areas
Good.
in the future. So it's almost like a trade 1-for-1, right? Because they're already impervious, so you're allowed to go back with the same impervious. But we will have some form of stormwater management no matter what we do on the site.
All right.
Okay.
One thing I was gonna say, this doesn't include our like covered storage or garages, correct?
No, I didn't include that because we still had quite a bit of questions on that, and we have yet to go out to survey that with you guys. So, but it is becoming apparent of the quantity of size that you guys have, that probably not all of that outdoor storage area for either the city or BPW is gonna fit on the site.
Right.
Right.
It's becoming pretty clear.
Mhm.
Morgan, if you look at the site that the city hall sits on, that lot, and you look at the land that the city and the BPW occupy on Schley, the acre, what is the total acreage that we presently occupy with the police department too, of course?
That is a very good question, and I'm not sure I have that information.
Okay. Thank you.
I just want to mention one last thing in terms of managing expectations. One thing, I think Morgan knows this, I mean, that's a great report. I'm really surprised we're moving this quickly.
Yeah,
But one of the things that we have to be conscious of is that the Army is conducting an environmental study
right.
of that property, and it's expected they're going to find some problems there. And so that will definitely take time to remediate. And so I think we all just need to understand this is going to be a long-term process, but
Oh, definitely.
Yeah, I applaud you for doing it early.
I applaud you for doing it early. I mean, coming to us, that's great. I didn't expect to have such information like that so quickly. I thought we would be waiting for the environmental report and just kind of, moving along more piecemeal, but anyhow.
We
Thank
like to crunch the numbers. Thank you. The footprint, though, of the existing building is, I believe, 18,000 square feet, if that helps you,
Yeah, of the city hall.
of just the city hall. That's
Right.
correct.
Yeah.
Schley
Sometime
Avenue-
in, I'm sorry.
Schley Avenue's probably around 5 in total.
It's 5 acres.
Between technically 1, 2, 3, and then the maintenance building is actually 3 parcels. So it's right around 5.
Okay,
And for everyone's knowledge, the Army Reserve property is 5.25 acres.
right.
But
And
just to
that's-
clarify, it's 5.25 acres, but not necessarily the most efficient 5.25 acres.
Mhm.
Because if anyone's not seen, it goes to a point in the back.
Right.
So as
Right.
opposed to Schley, which is rectilinear, so
Yeah.
we're actually, there's less land there than
That's what-
usual land than there is down in Schley.
I would agree, considering it's backed up against that residential neighborhood, you would need to do some significant landscaping along that edge to
Right.
to buffer that.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Morgan.
guys.
Appreciate.
And we'll take some comments. Come on up. And then.
Don't
Step
run
it-
away,
step it,
Morgan.
You can go next.
Fred Dilla, my wife Linda and I live on Drake Knoll. We're the neighborhood immediately next to the Army
Yeah.
Reserve property. Lived there 10 years. I'm 20 feet from the motor pool. I've had 10 years of negotiations with the 3 COs without their incessant idling of diesel trucks, sometimes up to 6 hours. And I'm particularly, before I say anything else, I want to thank City Council and particularly Deputy Mayor Saliba for your engagement with our congressional delegation. This would have gone on for years without particularly Senator Coons putting those 2 lines in the bill. So thank you all for doing that. We're very happy to have some part of the city in that property as opposed to 50 diesel trucks. And I will also want to thank you for asking the Army to do the environmental assessment. I know one of your next steps as you're beginning planning, what are you going to put there and how you're going to pay for it? If you put the cost of environmental remediation on the Army, that saves something. It's been a motor pool for 75 years. It's mostly paved, which means that oil is in the ground. And so there's probably some environmental cleanup.
Right.
The second thing, someone just mentioned how awkward the property is. It goes to a point.
Right.
2 of our Drake Knoll neighbors would probably like to negotiate with you on the use of that point. It's not going to be useful to you. having the environmental cleanup paid for by the Army and having two of my neighbors possibly buy some of that property might lower the cost for you. And on behalf of all of
I'm
us, at
taking
Great Knoll,
names.
we want to be engaged with you as you plan the use of that property. We particularly thank you for the words that you put in the Gazette, that you will take our neighborly needs in mind.
Of course.
After 10 years of noise, we would like to have you as neighbors, but we want a buffer between what happens there and us. So we're at your service. Half of my neighbors are here, and we would be happy to help you as you begin planning on this. So thank you.
Thank you.
Come on up.
My name is Elizabeth Ann Schulz. I live at 5 Drake Knoll. I have lived there for 33 years. I have worked inside and outside as a volunteer with that Army group. The last time was when their employment was here, and then when 40 of them came back. I know that building inside, out, around, because when I moved there, it was just Delaware was there. It wasn't Pennsylvania, Maryland, and Delaware. Like my new neighbors, we did not have all the motors and everything for 20 years. That all came after it became more active and so forth. I have walked that ground with my dogs. I have sat out there with the soldiers. So I probably had the most time in that piece of property because I bought it in 1986 and I built in 88. So I've been a long time resident. I did a lot here. I know a lot of people that put a lot of work into that. And I've been there from the train to everything, but I am thrilled. I will miss them terribly because when I first moved here, we had things there. People took cookies, we took cakes. They were really our thing. And I grew up in the Deep South where we called them armories. You call them reserves here. And so that's a way of pattern that I had grown up with. And I loved it when I moved here. So I'm happy to have you here. I kind of had a suspicion when the employment was going out because I heard some rumors. And I also like to thank Ted because I know Ted was there every time that I was, and he did work hard on doing this also. Thank you.
Thank you.
Stephanie, come on up. Back to back nights.
But I've got to leave for orchestra shortly. So I have a question first, and I apologize, I missed the first part of the meeting, so maybe it was said. The existing city hall structure that the city took out a bond referendum to help pay for. What's the status of that bond referendum, and has it been fully paid, or are we still paying on the bond for the last expansion? of City Hall?
2025.
Okay, so my, I want to focus a little bit, not on the self-interest of Drake Knoll, because it is a community I care about, but I am thinking more globally about the city. And I think there's a lot more that needs to be done before you're looking at brass tacks of how are we going to plan it? Because I think this is maybe a 25-year project, not a 5-year project or a 10-year project. I don't think you can plan for the redevelopment of this property without globally thinking of what's going to happen to Schley Avenue and what's going to happen to City Hall and the impact on those residents on those streets. Because I certainly don't want my neighborhood to benefit from City Hall being redeveloped, only to have lots on in town sold and into mini lots and overdevelopment in those areas. Nor do I want to see over commercialization of those areas. So I think it is a global city issue. I think the city needs to bring the public into those discussions, because I don't think you can talk about abandoning the current structures without talking about the impact to town. I also think strategically, all of us can't help but be impacted by working remotely in COVID. So why do you want to build as massive as you might dream of, when we all know that working remote meetings, and having less staffing in a building is maybe what the global future is. I know that there are some corporations that have offices that are essentially mobile. So, you know, if Joe Schmo and April are in on this day, you know, you move their stuff into the office. I know some of you come from corporate America, you've seen that. So I don't know necessarily that we want to build a monstrosity of a city hall. I think in looking at it, I think it would be wise to invest in a planner who is going to make sure that you're building the most efficient building, one that is LEED certified or whatever the latest initials are in terms of having a zero energy type building. But I don't think you can do any of those things without spending, you know, some years planning and globally thinking about it. I think it'd be doing a disservice. I think if you just start spending money now on plans without having those discussions, I think it would not be beneficial to the entire town. And certainly before you think of selling off portions of this property or doing anything, because I don't know if there are any restrictions on the city turning around and selling the land under whatever you negotiated with the feds. I think you really need to look at the global impact of this to the town. I think also from a city hall standpoint, there's something to be said for City Hall being so close to 2nd Street in the heart of downtown and keeping you as part of the community. I mean, we're almost the last street out in town. And so if you put everybody out there, I mean, it used to be you could call City Hall and you get a friendly voice and you go, hey, Myrtle, how you doing? On the phone. You don't even get that now with City Hall. So the more that you move it out into a, you know, a big box down the street, you really change a little bit of the culture of this town. And I've always thought about writing an op-ed piece on, like, Lewes needs to decide if we're first town in the first state or if we're the city of Lewes, because if we're operating like the city, it's more of a conglomerate, whereas if it's the first town in the first state, it's a small town feel. And so I do think I'm not, you know, I do commend City Hall for preserving this property, that it's going to be city land and not county land or something else. But I do think that you can't plan this land without planning the property that the city already has in town.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
your thoughts on that. Is anyone else? Oh, no.
Bill Adelman, 5 Flamingo Court. I just want to change things up a little bit. And since everybody has a wish list, I think it would really be great to give Lewis and Bloom an acre of ground there, and we'll put a greenhouse up. I want an acre, but I'll settle for a half an acre or even a quarter acre. But if we could have some property there in a remote area, and I know it's a long-term process, we could raise money to put a greenhouse and a potting shed up there. And the only thing we're doing, we're going to benefit the community. We're going to keep smiles on everybody. What Lewis and Bloom does and what Parks and Rec do, we kind of work together. So it's not a bad thing to think about. And so that's just LIB/greenhouse. So keep that in mind. Thank you.
So you got down to a half acre already, so I'm thinking you'd probably take quarter acres with us.
Well, look,
It's a start.
I went for an acre and I'm backing down for a quarter acre is really good.
Bill.
And
I appreciate it.
not only that, we'll take care of City Hall there with flowers. I mean, it's a win-win situation for everybody. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. Brett, you're quiet up there. You have anything to say?
No, it all sounds good. It's exciting. I guess I would be interested in how the final design firm is going to be selected. I think it would be really interesting to have a competition, a design competition, and obviously it shouldn't be selected on price, because you can design a very poor facility if you're real too cheap. So that's the only thoughts that I had is I think we have a chance here to put a building together that really fits our needs and is attractive at the same time, and maybe have a competition for of select architects to give their concepts of what it could, how it could function and what it's going to look like.
Thanks, Chris. So I'm going to go ahead and move on from this topic because I think, like I said, we've already talked about it. There's a lot of unknowns and it is a long-term process. So, is there someone? Okay, was there a question online or something?
People are saying we're
No,
not close
they can't hear me?
enough to the
Okay,
mics.
all right, that's the issue. All right. So the next one, they can hear me, right? Yeah. Just need to be closer.
The mic to you, but then you pulled it
Okay.
closer, so.
Is discussion about electric vehicle fleet charging and public charging. So I imagine this has to do with both city vehicles as well as metered areas where the public would have e-charging stations. So Austin, Tim, I know that you've been subject matter experts on this so far. So do you want to kind of tag team this one?
So I think the goal of this exercise is to kind of reinitiate the discussions that had happened earlier in the 2022 timeframe, but to get an understanding of, locations that you guys are trying to target for these charging stations. The board's here to kind of speak on their feelings. But one of the things is the way that it was structured originally is Paul Ebalds was the original donor. And he posted a credit on each one of the accounts. And so that credit's been exhausted, and we're to the point now where for us, we want to try and move towards a direction where somebody owns it and there's some sort of fee associated with it so that the BPW is made whole with charging electric rates.
Sure.
And so I really wanted to spark that back up
Okay.
because, we had the conversation, we're all busy. And then, so right now, as we speak, Tim and I met today, we talked about it a little bit. I think just breaking it down, locations, kind of the ownership framework, and then obviously from our side, a rate. Some utilities, they charge a special rate for EV charging stations. Some charge just a commercial rate. And then just talking about next steps. I know Tim had reached out to Brianne at DENREC. I don't know if you've heard anything back from her, but trying to kind of move in a direction that's benefits both.
You have,
parties.
right?
Right. I did speak with her. She returned my call. And what I've learned is that, I don't know if you all will remember, but in the several past years, the state has offered a program where they encourage municipalities to invest in infrastructure with the idea that the material costs associated with the charging stations you'll be able to recover a good portion of those costs. All installation costs, contractor costs are borne by the municipality or the BPW in our case here. So this program has been running for several years, and the current program, which is just like the previous program, they made no changes at all, she confirmed, expires at the end of April. And if we're going to take advantage of this program, the material would have to be purchased, not necessarily installed, but at least purchased by the end of April with all documentation and filed with the state. I did learn also that this program will be terminated at the conclusion of April. In other words, in the past, it's been just they hit the refresh button every 6 months or so, and they're not going to hit their refresh button. It's going to be killed, and they don't know what the next program will be, but it will be very different. It will be different than what we have what's on the table right now.
And it only pertains to level 2 chargers, I believe.
Correct. Now, as far as I know, the program that will come out sometime later on this year, again, will be level 2. There were no details forthcoming. She cannot offer anything. Nothing has been shaped or discussed. I think they're actually waiting to see what federal incentives or programs that the feds create, which they might be able to model and adapt to Delaware.
Are there vendors out there that'll just install a couple of charging stations and take a
Sure.
royalty? I mean, that,
I believe,
Yeah,
I'm
they-
not positive, but there are some municipalities that do it. Like I know Ocean City has a level 3 at their convention center, level 2s at the Clarion Hotel and down at the inlet parking lot. Bethany Beach has a couple that are downtown. Ours were just, at the time, were donated.
Yeah,
So there was
understood.
no,
Yeah.
there was no credit card associated or a way of
Right.
processing it. We don't enforce the parking, so
Yeah.
to me, it makes more sense for you guys to kind of take the lead on it, and then we would just sell as a municipal rate or a rate in general.
Yeah, just, and to back up from the public's sake, the original program was to help with the introduction of
Yeah.
EVs and to incentivize people. So you weren't allowed to charge for the electricity on those if you got money. Now it's moved on, and as you get more introduction, it's becoming freestanding. There are private companies that will install,
service.
Sure.
but then they take the fees on it.
Right, and I would also say that kind of relationship is not supported by the state program where they will pay reimburse the city or the BPW for the cost of materials.
But in this case,
We-
would the
in-
vendor install their own equipment?
Oh, it's a different business model. What I'm just saying is that the program, if we go through DENREC and took advantage of that, requires a purchase. The city has to acquire the material, the hardware, the station. And then the rest of it is,
So we have to buy it.
But the
But we
part of
can-
it though,
we
the rate itself.
the rate
figuring
is a
out,
big part of the problem.
Yeah, whether
Or
or not
it's-
it's for us, if it's a commercial rate or if it's a dedicated rate. I know in some municipalities, they create a dedicated rate that's EV specific.
Right.
And then there's other municipalities that just charge it out as a commercial rate.
Hmm.
Again,
What were
you
you
go
gonna
back to
say?
service size as well. Tim, and I can't remember and Anne Marie, you probably know this, the DENREC and DelDOT program where they're doing,
Right.
is that for developers to come in?
That's not for developers. They're working primarily with retailers.
Yeah.
Right.
And that, so that is, and that's really the level 3
Yeah.
network. But even if we purchase the equipment, we can work with, say, ChargePoint and use, the charge point to charge people so that, again, you're collecting the money and it's not a free charger. So that the question becomes, is it, like, for instance, in Maryland, you have BG&E as the electric utility who actually has chargers out there, and they own and operate the chargers. And if I stop to charge, I'm, swiping my card and I'm paying BGE. My understanding from our discussions, Austin, is the way you've thought about it, and I don't know what the other members of the board have thought, is that the city would own and maintain the chargers. We would pay you for electricity, but then we would collect a fee, through some sort of a, charge at the site technology that people would pay us and then we pay you. So, we'd have to figure out what your rate is, and then we'd have to make sure that we factor in covering our costs and everything to.
We're trying to make a margin.
Right.
Mhm.
Or at least
And
not
we
lose
need-
money.
right.
Yeah, not lose money is the point.
Right.
Well, and from our perspective, we just, I don't know who would police it from our side. I
Mm.
mean, Sharon, okay, so there's your answer. Yeah.
That was fast, Darren.
She saw that one coming.
One thing I know, Milford is doing, and they got a grant through Volkswagen.
Hmm.
And they're installing level 3 chargers in the downtown. So while level 3 chargers can't be done through this program, it might be worth looking for opportunities to get funding for level 3 are really expensive.
And that's
There's a
very
mic over
impactful
to it.
to the
There's a
grid
mic, sorry.
and your capability to serve. I don't know, for the audience, I'll just back up and explain this to you all. Level 2 charging stations are simply a 120/240 volt level charging stations. When you move up to level 3, you're at the 277, 480 volt level. And it will charge your electric car very, very quickly, but you have to have a good transmission and distribution system to support that kind of demand, because it's going to be instant on and, you know, to charge the car in a very, very short period of time. Whereas the other thing is at level 2 is charging at, well, a big microwave, right? That kind of thing.
Well, I mean,
Yeah.
so a level 2 will charge a car in about 6 to 8 hours. Level 3 will charge a car in about a half an hour,
Mm.
about that.
Full range.
But it's also,
Mm.
it depends upon the locale. I mean, if you're on an interstate and you're stopping, you need the quick charge, because you don't want to sit there for 6 hours.
Mhm. Mhm.
Although you may sit in traffic for 6 hours, but,
My
but
understanding is,
if you're in, you know, if you're going to a restaurant or a local or an office, you don't need that level. So it's not like one size fits all
No.
for every application.
No, of course not. No.
Right,
And
and in a downtown atmosphere, or, you know, small town, I think it certainly makes sense to rely more on the level 2, because you want people to come and stay and walk around. But the other thing that I've learned is that there are people who will stop at a town if they have a level 3.
right.
And so, again, I think, you know,
be a draw.
Yeah.
there's benefit to, if the infrastructure supports it, having possibly a couple of fast chargers, but really focusing on the level 2s.
And the opportunity to actually bring a level 3 into the city is something that the regulators on the state level, Denrick and so forth, would, that is very closely managed. It's not available to just anybody to have a level 3, regardless of if you have the funds to do it or not.
Because
they're-
Milford's doing it in their downtown.
Yeah, I understand.
Okay.
Yeah, I understand. And the VW network that you described, that might be, I'm not familiar with the VW. I am familiar with the Porsche one. And what is happening is, it's not unlike the Tesla product, where their charging stations are wonderful for Teslas, but
Oh, no, this is
but-
different. This is a grant. So if
Yeah,
you
grant.
recall
No.
from Volkswagen, because
Yes.
Volkswagen had that little snafu a few years ago where they were fudging the emissions.
Right.
And so then, so one of the things they're doing is they have grant funding that they've been doing to support electric vehicle infrastructure.
I
So
understand.
that grant is not currently available, but Milford applied for the grant to do level 3 in their downtown. So they are going to be installing charge point. So it is charge point, which
Is the
is
vendor.
kind of the right, but that's also the interface where, you know, people pay.
Right.
They have a charge point account, they swipe their phone and everybody's happy. So,
I mean, I don't think realistically, though, we're gonna make any move on this before April, though. I mean, does it sound like it? I mean, you would have to go through the process probably.
But weren't you
of voting
saying
on
it
the rate. I mean,
expires when?
That would be a
At the end of
process on your
April.
side, right? To even have a meeting to vote on the rate.
Well, if the state is paying, it will pay us for level 2. We maybe could find a grant to pay the difference between 2 and 3.
well, I think that they would only pay for 2, so I think, I
Well,
think.
my
it-
point is, the state pays for 2, and we could look for maybe someone like Volkswagen to pay the difference, because they wouldn't then be paying the full
Amount.
tab for full level 3.
Or
Hey.
alternatively, you could say, we know we want to do 6 level 2 chargers. We're gonna go ahead and buy them. And then work the rate out, you know, get that 90% rebate. So you have it, but you don't install them until after the end of April.
You only have a window in which to do this as it stands.
Right.
And, yeah, the only thing
And
I'd
the-
say from a timing perspective, you know, if we could get them in before the summer,
Mhm.
because I don't know if anyone's noticed, but the amount of EVs is exponentially increasing. And we're putting our businesses and community at not the selling point that they want to be for people with EVs.
So
Do you,
again, like going. If that's the direction, it's being able to try and identify areas that may be priority. So
Right.
that they can be identified to see what kind of capital costs would need to go into being able to supply the service to a 200 amp. Because you're gonna split it, a 200 amp service will go and then be split, and then it'll be 100 amp for one, 100 amp for the other. But Anne Marie kind of discussed, we had threw some ideas out there of different areas within town, but again, you're gonna be replacing a spot
Right.
that is normally for a regular combustion engine or an EV. So you're taking parking away in one aspect and replacing with EV parking.
Well, and I think that's a question for council.
We could
Do
put-
you say you have to feed the meter for your $1.50 an hour? And you pay the electric? I mean, some places do that.
right, and the other option would be to keep the EV stations, the charging areas in an area where we don't have to affect our parking, metered parking inventory. So in other words, it would be somewhere else. And yeah, walking distance and so forth,
Mm.
right. Yeah,
Has there been any thought to the Schley Avenue parking lot that we're looking at?
yeah,
When we had the
Refurbishing.
design done for that, we included the conduit so that we could
adapting.
adapt it and install chargers there. We didn't include it as part of the bid specs. So, I mean, again, the locations that we currently have chargers that are walking distance to downtown, you have them at Schley
Mhm.
and you have them at Otis Smith.
Mhm.
I was thinking actually that the Third Street parking lot, which gets the least use of our downtown parking lots, might be a place that
Right.
might be worth, and I think you said the electricity's there. What's that?
Maybe the Rodney Hotel.
What about the trailhead?
The trailhead could certainly.
Yeah,
be-
that's a good.
Then you're not taking away paid parking
Right.
Mhm.
if you put it nestled it in the corner over there.
Yeah,
You know what, let me just caution everyone here and I love the ideas, keep coming up forward with locations. This is great conversation. But if we are trying to manage our costs, we need to think about what infrastructure already exists in the field.
But
And what-
I thought you guys had done that, right?
I know, but
Identified-
yeah, we
Okay.
have done that. We have done that. But what I'm saying is that if you want to continue to come forward with additional locations, I'm happy to accommodate by doing a field visit to identify what assets are out there, work with Austin. But, we just need to be mindful of what additional costs we might be incurring if we get to
But
expand.
we would realistically need to get this on like a February agenda for us.
I mean, if we want to go ahead and purchase them, we
There's a
should,
rebate program, meaning
it's a
we
rebate.
all
Oh, then-
outlay
Yes.
all the costs and we
Right.
hope that we get the 90%.
No, we
No,
would get it. We
We
would
would
get it.
get it. There's plenty,
Just have to have
I-
the UPC codes.
Yeah.
there, That's it.
So Austin, just interpret, because you have looked at it, where are the places where the electric infrastructure seems to best support it?
Well, so we looked at Johnny Walker Beach.
Yep.
Right, there's a transformer right there on the corner. There's two cross-section parking spots. So you could theoretically, EVs are typically smaller, so you could put two EV kind of in that area. Blockhouse Pond, there's a transformer that sits on the pole. I don't know if it's big enough, but if you're changing out a pole mount transformer, it's a little bit easier to come down and feed and it would be on like the parallel parking side of Blockhouse Pond.
So that's on DuPont Avenue.
Yes.
Okay.
We did look at,
curb parking.
did look at
maybe.
Third. The only thing you have with Third is that it's all the services are overhead. There's a pole in the back corner of the Third Street lot. It's kind of dependent on where you would locate on the Third Street lot. If you were putting them closer to the road or you were pushing them closer to the business. We looked at the library, the backside of the library.
Did you look
Yeah,
at the
and
trailhead?
Where the trailhead, you mean?
Maybe I'm talking the same thing. So it'd be like You have the library side of the parking lot, and then you have the back side. Is that the trailhead?
Where
Yeah.
there's a standalone
Yes.
bathroom.
We-
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
we
right.
looked there.
I'm mentioning where the restrooms are on the other side of the restrooms.
Right,
Yeah,
we looked at
yeah.
that.
We looked at that. Where else did we look? It's a year ago.
Yeah, you mentioned third. That
We
was-
did say the Canal Front
Oh.
Park was another area as well.
Mm.
We didn't look at that one though.
So if
Right,
if
and-
we want to do the non-paid areas,
Not metered.
or right, non-metered areas, except Johnny Walker might be good, because again, that idea is if you've got somebody who's coming to the beach for 3 hours, that's and you're still, you would still pay the parking fee.
Right.
You know, we'd have to be very specific, but, you know, so if you look at Schley, Otis Smith, Trailhead, and,
Third.
and Johnny Walker, well, Candace had suggested not doing third because we can phase in later if we need to,
Oh.
the metered lot.
Okay.
Oh,
I
and
didn't
then,
hear her say that.
didn't you say that? Oh,
Okay, maybe you
I thought
thought
that you
her.
said that you didn't want to give up the paid, I'm sorry.
But there's some unpaid on that third. street.
No, we weren't.
I didn't mention third, no.
Oh, I'm sorry.
My suggestion is the trailhead.
Right.
Okay,
And she-
right, I thought that you said the trailhead after I said third because of the paid, the metered, because third is metered. So,
If we were looking for non-metered
Right.
parking, that's why I recommend the trailhead.
oh, and then George H.P. Smith,
Yeah, that's a good one.
so if we did George H.P. Smith, Johnny Walker Beach, Trailhead, Schley and Otis Smith, that's 5 locations. And
And they don't take away from
You can
parking
charge
space.
2 cars at one time out of these things.
You just
can have up to-
segregate your charging.
I'm sorry?
Segregate your charging because you're.
Oh,
Right,
okay.
right,
because it's gonna slow
But-
down your charge.
but the
So you
6
recommend just.
You're-
maximum,
Oh, I see.
6 per location.
right, I was
But
gonna
it would
say,
slow
the 6
down the
isn't
charge
per,
if you
like
use
the
it.
city,
If
the
2 of
6
them
would
are
be
being
per
charged
location, so if
Oh,
we
really?
could do up to, and we probably don't want to do 6.
Yeah,
at
I think that's the thing we talked about last time too. Then you get into the maintenance and then.
Right, so it might be, we might do 4 at a couple locations and maybe 2 at the others.
Well,
But when
part,
you- I was gonna say, when you source, just saying this from experience, when you source these units,
yeah,
just make sure that you have a vendor that will service them. 'Cause
correct.
that is the toughest thing that we're
Okay.
running into now.
Oh, yeah, you're dealing with that, yes, so. So,
And the other part of it is that if for the purpose of our conversation this evening, it's about making a commitment to do something, the actual numbers will have to be determined by measurements in the field, you know, and actually how much space we can.
So
Yeah,
if we get a
devote to that.
consensus kind of, it's not, yeah, is consensus okay? Yeah,
Sure.
There's no
consensus, I
votes.
just wanted to check. Of general locations, I can work with Rhett and see kind of what the costs allocated for each one would be.
Well, for the immediate term, choosing these convenient ones, but the more advanced notice you can give us of what you'd like to see 2 years, 3 years down the line. We're having to do upgrades to our network, and it would be nice to have those so we can put them into the capital budget for upgrades. down
Mike, can you
the
use
line.
the mic? People can't hear you.
Use it.
Oh, I thought I moved it over.
What's that?
I said I thought I had moved it over.
I don't
It's
know.
okay. Oh, I just got a thing saying they couldn't hear
I
you.
think to keep in mind for the level 2, as Austin described it, we're talking about basically 100 amp services per charger. And I would like to think that that is not going to be too impactful for your load management exercise. Is that what you're speaking to?
If you put 4 level 2s in off of the same transformer,
That's a
that's a
different,
problem.
that's a different issue.
So
I
my
understand.
only point is that if we're gonna,
I think,
you know, the more advanced notice we can have
right,
and we can accommodate in our going forward capital plans and design. And also, if we're going to consider level 3s some places, the more advanced notice we have of where those are gonna be,
sure.
because we're having to deal with the EV charging in the houses as well as.
Sure.
And the rest of the electrification.
Right.
So I'm just saying that, the more advanced notice we can get into our budget
Sure.
plans, because we're planning 5 years in advance.
Exactly. I appreciate that, Tom. Let me be clear. I'm a big proponent of the idea of us exploring the opportunities for a level 3. That would be my strongest suggestion for us to actually put us on the map for EV vehicles and so forth. But the constraint that I understand is the BPW's ability to provide that kind of 3-phase service on demand. And so I'm mindful of how impactful that kind of commitment could be by the city to go forward with level 3. I'm dependent upon you all to
Right, and just-
study that and tell me that you all can do it.
Just to be clear, it's not just BPW. Any distribution company doesn't run 3-phase current throughout their system, so.
Oh, I understand, but
So,
you have 3-phase going down Polytown Road, for example, and is it capable of supplying a level 3? I don't know. So that's what I'm speaking to. Because otherwise it could dim the lights in the city.
So I'm meeting with the city manager in Milford tomorrow. So I know, again, they've been doing a lot in this area. And I'm also supposed to connect with the city manager in Newark on some things. So they've also kind of been doing all that. So I can find out who their vendors have been and
I mean, are a couple of us interested in having that on the February agenda to just make a decision whether we want to do this or not, even so she can gather more information for us through these meetings. And then we can make a call. Otherwise, we're gonna miss this April. We need to,
No,
we
you should
need to
actually,
vote on it,
you should actually have it on our agenda,
That's what I'm saying.
Yes.
Okay, well,
period.
what about the rate piece here? This
Can
is a
you, do you
critical.
think that in a couple of weeks, you'd be able to provide us, what sort of your rate scheme might be
do we need the rate though
to order
we don't need them to purchase. We just need it before. we
Sure.
install.
And then we could
It's
figure
part
out
of
how
what
much
we're-
we would charge, though. Yeah,
Right.
we could always adjust our rate, of course.
Yeah, but we don't need that in order to. move
No, I'm
forward.
just trying to.
No, I understand what you're saying, but we don't need that at the moment.
Before summertime, do you think?
Our March meeting is, or our February meeting is getting chock-a-block.
Okay,
And when is the February meeting?
We'll just put it on our
we'll
February.
put it on.
Mhm.
Yeah, put it on our
my-
February.
My list.
At least they
Yeah,
cut, Fisher cut.
at least we can make it.
So our February meeting is the 22nd, so.
Okay, all right, so the next one, just a quick update from press and myself. Since the last time we met, both the city and the BPW's engaged in their mitigation planning meeting. So just to update folks, ours covered the discussion on the executive committee on resiliency recommendations. So in our past workshop, we just recently discussed 2 recommendations coming out of there, which was a open space sort of funding process, as well as the potential for a letter. And frankly, I was surprised how contentious the and controversial the sort of disclosure letter became. So we're gonna have to, sort of chew on that a bit more, it seems. So that's sort of an update there on that. As always, Chatham Marsh gives us an update around the Phragmites management. I suggested going to goats, but we're going to stick with Roundup. Apparently, rounding up of the goats was not, of interest, but,
Well, Roundup is a huge other issue.
yeah. So that is what happens. I think they tend to have a schedule, as you know, they spray, and then I think the plan is to cut the whatever dies before the summertime on the Phragmites. So we'll continue to debate the merits of that. Then there was a training update, and I think we discussed ones that we had done, but also discussed some potential training opportunities for the coming year. What we tend to do is, in the past, for example, we've done tabletop exercises on how would you react, it's kind of like a war game around a hurricane, or one of Anne Marie and Chatham and I went to one where they talked about one that they're really looking at is active shooter training, those kinds of things. So those are out there for municipalities and such to take advantage of through, it's DEMA, is that who does it through
Yes.
Delaware? So we'll participate in some of those, and I think Chatham was able to wrangle his way down to New Orleans to participate in the
Well, I have to
hurricane
find-
training,
he's
which,
got the approval to do it.
okay, so we'll see if he makes it down there.
Well, it's the first week in April and I think
Okay.
he started making the plans.
All right, good. All right.
So
So
he's
he's gonna,
really hoping.
and he's done it
somebody from BPW
before.
would join him.
yeah, he's done it before, and he said he got some value out of
So
the conference, so,
Chatham and I went in like 2018, I think.
okay. So that's, and then I think our next one is, we put one in February. I don't see it on the calendar here. I can't remember. March is our next
So,
one.
Like March, I feel like it's the 8th or something, but
And then I think the other thing that came out of ours is just one of the people who participates in that mitigation committee is Danielle Swallow, and she brought up the idea that for a lot of this grant money and resiliency grant money that's out there for us, is that maybe this group, she proposed that maybe this mitigation group could act as sort of another place to identify
projects, like-
useful grants for the city. So that was the major discussion of activities for 2023. And to that, I'll turn it over to you, Press, and you can catch us up on your mitigation committee.
Well, since I'm virtual and
Oh, go ahead.
Tom, and Austin and so are there, I've delegated that to them. I think it's more
Sounds good.
easier for them to explain it live than me virtual.
All righty.
So, I guess first of all, one of the things we did talk about was we've done so many hurricane exercises over the last number of years. As you said, we're looking at other alternatives. I think one of the ones that came up was cybersecurity, because that's really the
next
flavor of the day, the most concern at this point. And so I think we're going to investigate cybersecurity as a potential for the next exercise. I don't want to go into a lot of detail. We presented at the mitigation meeting. Press is the chairman of the resiliency committee, and the team actually, well, we had more in the audience. We have Bob
Oh, yeah, they're
Heffernan
okay.
in the back, and Barbara, I'm sorry. So, and Candace is on it also. Looking at all of the BPW assets and where we're at risk from the various events, whether it's hurricanes, precipitation, cyber terrorism, winds, across the board, and identifying the assets that are at risk to these various events. The critical ones, so it just, the high level is for sea level rise, what BPW has chosen is to use the high level sea level rise curve. Because, and just to preface it, all of our assets are critical assets. So while the mid-level curve may be suitable for the general populace, your critical assets, you want to make sure you protect. So we're using the high-level curve. We're using subsidence. We're using 3-foot freeboard on top of it. So that gives us, just to put it in reference, for like where the many areas of the beach are at 7 feet, would mean that our minimum flood elevation is 11.6 feet. And that's to make sure that we have everything covered. We used 120 miles per hour for wind loading to make sure the buildings, the water tower, the various structures would be able to sustain it. Robin, who's walking back in the room, and Josh have put together a spreadsheet of all of the assets of BPW, elevations, criticality, So that's what we're working off of. So we're just fine tuning the database right now. There are parts that are within the control of the Board of Public Works. For example, how high we place transformers, those type of things. But there are other things that our assets are at risk to. For example, ground floor showers, ground floor toilets, where hose bibs are located on the outside of houses, which would affect our assets and the public's, ability to access clean water. So those all fall within the city's purview. So, one of the things that, we would ask is that, the city look at the building code, and, we discussed this at the mitigation team meeting, on how the city code interacts with what we're trying to do at the BPW. I think that was kind of the high points. Mike, Austin, you have anything else?
The only thing I would add is we looked at the wastewater treatment plant and the current City of Lewes emergency operations plan to see where we can improve. You can always improve it. So we took a look at that. We got some comments back. Barbara had a lot of comments that we added in. And then I believe the last one was develop list of programs and policies to encourage public acceptance and implementation of green technologies and practices to minimize climate change.
Yeah, and just going back to, obviously, the elephant in the room is the wastewater treatment plant. That's one of our assets most at risk. And, we held a public workshop last week. We'll take the public comment. The comments are open till February 6th, close of business. And then we have a board meeting on February 10th.
Yes.
Where we'll internally, but the public is welcome to be there. The comments, and from there, determine what the next steps are. That obviously is the big issue for the BPW, and I encourage you all. Sharon has put together on our website place where all of the documentation related to the wastewater treatment plant, presentations, reports. If anyone has trouble sleeping at night, I encourage you to read the engineering report. It's 120 pages. And but we're trying to provide all the information there so the public has access to it.
Let me just add a little bit about the mitigation committee. We had a great committee: Sumner Crosby, Bob Hefferman, Barbara Curtis, Mark Prouty, Candace, Robin, Tom himself, and Austin. And one thing wasn't specifically mentioned, but Robin particularly helped put together a map. We've identified all the types of assets that the BPW owns and manages. So he put together a map. He, with Josh and others in the BPW, put together a map that identifies, locates all those assets. And then we put together a spreadsheet that identifies their elevation and what flood zone they're in, and the coordinates to locate them in space. So that's all we know where all the assets are, except things like the things that are in the city that Tom just mentioned, drains and toilets and things like that we can't, and that's going to come under your ordinance. So
I guess you guys do the plumbing permits.
Right.
So if they're plumbing fixtures, aren't they?
Go to there.
Yeah, but we're talking about stuff that was built in the 1950s too. I mean, so we do not have a total list of what's inside a house.
So
Yeah.
how would we
Well, how would we
even,
know?
I mean, we don't have that
Might have-
either though.
Didn't you just agree to hire a consultant to kind of work out? the
That's
copper
one
and all that?
twenty,
120 water. That's for lead and copper.
so from a water perspective, you know,
We'll
some
start
of that's
mapping that.
covered,
But-
but from the sewer side, that's not.
But
And-
speaking of what Anne Marie just said, you all have the responsibility of the plumbing inspections
Mhm.
for new construction. Am I mistaken? Isn't that correct?
Sure, that's right.
And if that's the case, then going forward, from this date forward, if there are concerns that are associated with spigots, for example, I think you mentioned outdoor spigots that could form, you need a barrier break, I'm gonna call it a barrier to keep the, a problem from occurring. Wouldn't that be an expectation that we would have of you all to make sure that
So
that's
two
addressed?
things, first of all, the building code is is in the city
Oh, I
ordinance.
understand.
So it would have to be in the city ordinance that you could not have these things below a flood elevation. Secondly, going forward, that's true, but 90% of the housing stock in
course.
this town is existing. And that's of concern because it
I
all
don't
goes to the same
understand that.
place.
But I
How
guess
does-
the question is regardless of whether it's the board or the city, how do we
Mhm.
identify those? I mean, we don't have the ability to just go in people's houses to look for, things that are below base flood elevation.
We might have to, I mean, you might have to, or we might have to just grandfather certain things. I don't think we can go back and make them rebuild something that's already been in operation for decades possibly. So I think going forward is the important thing, or if they have major modifications, the same things that you require for other major modifications, that could be included in that easily enough.
Well, and just talking about, without having conferred about it, but there are parts of the code that get enforced on resale, for example, ground fault breakers.
No, they don't. We don't do any inspection of properties for resale.
Yeah. And
I don't know of anywhere that does.
Why
Lived
would
in a
we?
Jurisdiction that didn't, Pennsylvania, New York.
Yeah, but this is
I've
not-
never known of
I-
any jurisdiction.
Nowhere in Delaware does it.
And that brings me to a point that I was going to raise. In your mitigation study, did you all consider the grounding system for your electric distribution system? The transformers
Mhm.
and so forth, the pole mounted transformers that are
Well,
grounded.
Tim, the next step, we identified, this committee, we're not engineers and, well, again, some of us were, but for the most part, we identified the utility or the assets that we have. The next step, and that's going to be the biggest step, is trying to determine specifically what is done from an engineering standpoint or installation standpoint, because that was over and above the charge of this committee. We identified things. Now we're going to have to somehow say how they're going to be built and so forth.
And I can
So
appreciate what you've just said. What my question is, was that one of the items identified? Was that a component that was identified?
I mean, it will be when we talk about how we're going to ground transformers and so forth that have to be raised or moved.
Okay. All right, thank you.
And if just to kind of piggyback off of that, one of the benefits of this joint conversation is identifying these points. And so coming out of this, when Tom's talking about the asset identification, obviously that's something the BPW knows, the BPW can identify. But if there's recommendations that pertain to different code questions, having a conversation among the group of who's doing this and how do we capture that is the next step. And so I think we're seeing in real time one of the benefits of these discussions.
Yeah,
Yes.
said, Mike.
Yes. Okay.
So I think we're well aware of that, each other's mitigation streams. So let's move on to the last item, mercifully, right? We're here, so this is the discussion about street lighting at New Road and Park Road. So I think this has to do with light poles that were there previously, but they've deteriorated over time, and now people are asking, can we get those replaced?
And they were
kind of thing?
owned by the University of Delaware
And
back
Oh.
when they owned the property
And
Oh,
and metered, so they paid for the electricity.
hmm.
And who's been paying for it since the university gave up ownership? Has that been part of our flat
I
rate?
believe the
thing?
university was always paying.
Oh, good.
But now
So
that,
that meter base.
Yeah, but
So we
now
can still
that-
enjoy that
That
relationship.
meters in their name.
That's why we're having this conversation.
so now that the poles have rotted and the lights are no longer there,
Where do we go?
we've gotten complaints from residents in Canary Creek about safety at the intersection of Park Road and New Road. We reached out to DelDOT to find out if street lighting was part of their bridge project, and they said no. That based on their analysis, it wasn't warranted. They didn't need, there was no safety issue that lighting would resolve, but that their design would not preclude the city and or the board from going in and putting in street lighting.
That's nice of them.
So the question is,
Who?
is it something that we want to do? And if we do it, do we wait until after the bridge project? Because obviously anything we do now gets kind
Yes.
of torn up.
True.
These are not typical lights either, so
Right.
they shine everything down versus a standard typical street light within the city is kind of a free form. You go to Canary Creek or any other developments.
You have them in stock?
No, no, it's not a typical light, and we never owned them, so we don't have them as a stock.
But
item.
we wouldn't be bound to
Follow the
whatever
same.
was there.
Right.
No,
We could do something. What about like, just like the gooseneck lights?
you're talking about like the.
The
Cobra-
Cobra head,
Yeah,
you know.
I don't know.
I,
I mean, they're, okay, right.
Yeah, you never said pole.
yeah. Right.
Uh,
I like the idea of us not making a decision. this
Yeah.
evening. And I love the idea of waiting until DelDOT's done their new road, Canary Creek Bridge, and take it up, plan for it.
To the resident.
Kick it down the
feedback, Is this
street.
coming from like HOAs, or is it coming from a?
Do we get more than one? Okay.
Just
so-
to-
I know.
Oh, well,
Oh, it's one.
Oh, I don't hear
I
a
mean,
violin. do
that's
you?
cool.
But this does bring up an issue we've talked about before, which is that, we maintain, we go out and maintain the streetlights. But the streetlights are the cities. And
We're gonna have to
creating a standard for lighting and a standard for lumens
Right,
for the individual, because our guys go out and change the bulbs, the LEDs. But, which bulb should go on secondary streets, primary streets? Because right now it's kind of intermixed.
well, I think
And-
right now you light at the same lumen level throughout the cities.
No.
You have differences? I'm not talking about different types of bulbs or fixtures. I'm talking about all Cobra heads, for example, are, I believe, the same LED lumen. Is that
The
correct?
Cobra heads are,
Yeah.
they're all the same. It's when
Correct.
you get into like the atypical street lights that you may have some that are converted to LED.
It sounds like it.
And from your perspective, it's best because, again, you keep the same lights in stock, right?
Yeah,
Right.
really,
you-
the two types of lights that are used are the standard, like you go to Powelltown Village, which is the black post that goes up,
Yeah.
and more the antique style that's on Second Street and in 1812.
Right. But
Okay,
you have
so
a catalog that we could choose, right? I mean, not you all, that you own the catalog, but your vendor, right?
Yes.
Yes, that's
Well, the bottom line is we're not doing anything right now.
right.
So, okay. So you were just introducing the idea.
Right.
That is,
Yep.
that sort of germinate.
See if anybody had any strong ideas.
Well, and
Never
DelDOT, the
hear it.
reason that DelDOT didn't include it is because of the concerns from the neighbors that front or back New Road. So that's why they didn't include lighting, and that's the only thing is that these are the older style lights, so if you do go in and put a street light in, and if it's not
Right.
like somebody wants,
Sure.
you could get feedback that says they don't want it.
How many poles are we talking about?
Originally, there used to be poles that went the entire street side, plus there was 2 in the center median. The last one that was left would have been the center median closest to New Road. But there was one on either side of that center median.
Either end of the island.
Yeah.
you're Talking about, right?
Are these things like that? Would CTF funds cover something like that?
They
Probably
could,
could.
they could. There's also you sent me the thing for the Safe Streets for All, that, I mean, which is a federal
Yeah.
grant.
Well,
So,
Right.
okay.
And since the fixtures are no longer there, it's not a replacement.
No,
It's
really.
new, So it qualifies.
mhm.
Okay.
Okay.
Aaron, do you have any questions?
Yeah.
Too bad. I'm just kidding.
What's up? I'll go with Aaron Marshrush Cape Gazette, and I want to go back to the mitigation committees. And this is definitely an opinion, and I want to ask both BPW and Mayor and City Council this question. Do you feel the residents of Lewes Beach are properly aware of the predictions for their area? And how, if they are not, how is that being communicated to them? Some of these models that are being predicted using some pretty in-depth science.
I mean, I get the impression that almost everyone in the United States is aware of the effects of sea level rise. So being at the highest risk, to what extent people are ready to embrace drastic measures, that I'm not so sure.
I would point out, Aaron, that there was, our executive resiliency committee, there were, I think, at least 3 or 4 Lewes Beach residents who served on that committee, and that was about 9 months, 9 months or so. Yeah, and there was presentations from University of Delaware on the various projections for sea level rise, and so there's been a lot of awareness about it as well. So,
Okay. Anyone from the BPW?
No.
Easy.
It's fine.
It's not.
We just had a workshop. We just had a workshop for anybody that wanted to come.
Yeah,
And
sure.
went into a very in-depth presentation about sea level rise and what effects it could be. So if anybody didn't show up, that's their problem.
Well, actually, I think what I stated at the mitigation team meeting was, while in general, people are aware of flooding issues on the coast
stuff.
and rivers, specific properties, it's not clear that people understand how their property is at risk. Because especially when you look at the history of the the area, we've been lucky up until now. So, I think it's a mixed bag. There's a general awareness, but it's not gonna happen to me.
well,
So,
I would point out that for people who live on Lewes Beach, as you're mentioning, I think there's a pretty solid understanding that the flooding there occurs from the marsh, for example, where a lot of people automatically think, oh, I live on Bay Avenue, I live on the beach, I'm in real jeopardy, and they, will be at some point, but the current flooding does come from the marsh, and I think there's a general understanding of that.
and the only other thing I do want to make is that this is not a beach issue.
Nope.
The Back Bay flooding is as bad or more severe than the beaches. And so I really take exception to when we differentiate the two.
Agree.
Delaware Bay and Canary Creek feed the back of Lewes, and it is the town of Lewes that's at risk.
It's a good point that Tom.
Well
made.
said,
And
Tom.
we said, that's even in Donovan Smith when we were annexing them in. They are
Yes.
a community that is in the floodplain, so there was a risk from as a community standpoint of, again, bringing that community into adding to homes that are in the floodplain.
I think the better question might be, as Tom referenced, how many people who live in town?
Yes.
near it are aware of the jeopardy that they're in.
Absolutely.
Even more so. Yes.
And I guess my final question to that is, how do you balance, people's property values against the information that you are given? Because it seemed like with the real estate disclosure, that was a major pushback. Is there any consideration given to that? What these disclosures might do to property values, and do you compare that to the science that's available to you?
For me, it comes down to, just the a lot of times, like, if you're gonna go through the effort, is it enforceable, and what's your goal? And the ones that, the call to action, what are we saying? Like, just that you live in the floodplain, or are we saying that, are we taking that extra step, so therefore you may need to take additional engineering steps for your home, or you may come under future ordinances? I mean, what are we warning them of, you know?
Okay, thank you very much. I know that wasn't an easy question, so I appreciate you answering that.
We did have one comment.
Yeah,
Is there somebody online?
yeah, you can.
From George Terrell, we have a comment, replacing the light at New and Park. Please consider best practices in regards to wildlife, primarily migratory birds, downlighting, warm light, low light.
All right.
Would you guys like to comment on that, or?
It's on,
Right.
Yeah,
It was a comment, but.
yeah, no, it's a good
Right.
comment.
It's a great marsh after
Yeah.
all. Yes. Yeah.
It's a good comment. Go ahead.
it's a
Tim.
good comment, and to the extent that I can help shape a decision on what kind of lighting is acquired, I would take that into consideration, and I'm sensitive to what Mr. Terrell has said.
You said you also had a comment you wanted to
Yeah,
make
no,
about.
I'm good.
You
I'm
sure?
good. Yep.
Okay. Carolyn?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Anyone else? All right, we're on race to adjourn. Can I get a motion to adjourn? All right.
Second.
All in favor?
Second.
All right.
Thank you.
Good job.
Thank you, guys. Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Thanks, Chris.